Ready for your weekly tech fix? Want to know how technology sets us free? Well, get ready because here it comes. You're listening to Sovryn Tech with your host, entrepreneur and technophile Brian Sovryn. He's got a huge brain. And now, here's Brian.
Here I am, the golden stallion of the tech world, ready for another exciting episode of Sovryn Tech. This is episode 28 now. I'm going to stop counting at some point, but very, very exciting to have been going on for this long. As I constantly hear that there are podcasters, and I can kind of understand this, there are podcasters who say it's very, very difficult to come out with a show every single week. Far be it for me to understand how Free Talk Live does it, where, not that that's a podcast only, but how they do 7 nights a week is just incredible. And of course, I'm more than happy to be a part of that, including being on the Sunday night show, which recently has been announced. This is very exciting. I'm sure many of my listeners have already heard this, but I find it very exciting that Sunday night has been to some degree vindicated in that it is the most downloaded on average, based upon certain statistics. It is the most downloaded episode of Free Talk Live generally. And what do I mean by vindicated? Well, there's a lot of people that hate the Sunday, apparently, a lot of loud people that actually supposedly hate the Sunday night show for various reasons. And I could make some very crass statements as to why I think that may be, but there's no need for that. What I want to do right now, we do not have an opening story this week, but what I do have are opening thoughts, and I want to talk about PorcFest. Maybe you've heard all the PorcFest information you could ever possibly want to hear. Maybe you're at PorcFest and you're just done and you don't want to know anything more about PorcFest. If so, you know the drill. Sovryn Tech has sections, and you can just go ahead and skip to the next one if you don't want to hear about PorcFest. But I do think that I have, maybe some unique or at least little represented views on PorcFest, as far as I know. And I only say little represented because I don't really hear it from much of anywhere else. Not to say anyone else doesn't think the same way or that they have to, but I do think I have some perspectives that perhaps you'd want to hear. So anyway, this was my second PorcFest this year. Very, very, and PorcFest, when it comes up to PorcFest, it's always very exciting. I remember, when I was planning on going to my first one, I knew, which was last year, which would have been, I guess, 2012. For the 2012 PorcFest, I had wanted to go to PorcFest in 2011, and I knew I wasn't going to make that one. And so I was like, okay, but I'm going to make 2012. And so I had a really big lead up, lots of excitement. And PorcFest, in many ways, when I went to my first one, right now we're talking about PorcFest 2012. What I just attended was PorcFest 2013, or PorcFest X. Which kudos to the marketing team on that, because I actually liked how PorcFest X looked very much like the X-Men, the Xavier School for Gifted Children. The branding and the symbology all looked like that. I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but I certainly didn't pass my comic book laden gaze. But with PorcFest 2012, which was last year's and my first PorcFest, I felt when I got there, I was very, very, very excited to be there, and it was still a great time. I had a tremendous time. I had a tremendous time this year too. But going around, it was like 90 degrees outside, and it was very strange because a lot of people. Now, the attitude was different this year. I'll get into that. But last year, in 2012, the attitude was very... I don't even know how to exactly describe it. Other than that, I felt like there was a lot of military tenting. Like they would have up kind of like the mesh leafy camouflage that goes over like a tent and all that. There was a lot of that. There were some t-shirts for sale that I thought were very, very militaristic. A lot of people were wearing like camouflage, and then there were just tons of guns everywhere, gigantic, massive guns. Take your pick of the rifle, and it was probably there. And then again, with the heat, it being, last year's PorcFest was very, very hot. In the 90s at points, I think it's not unfair to say. And then just a lot of the verbiage going around, and I couldn't help but feel, and I've made this comment before in various areas, but I almost felt like I was in Afghanistan. Like it felt like a base camp, like a military base camp. And that did make me feel very uncomfortable. Fortunately, I met tremendous people there and hung out with great people last year. But the overall tone was for me, very unwelcoming. And it's interesting because this is a peace movement, right? The Liberty Movement's a peace movement. And like the whole thing is that, no, there's no trouble at PorcFest because everybody's peaceful and we can show you that. Well, that's not what I was being shown. Last year, I was being shown pretty much an army, at Rogers Campground, and I was being shown something that again looked very much like a standard base camp. And I mean, for a group that's peaceful and wants peace and wants to achieve their goals through nonviolent means, to be walking around armed to the teeth. There's a disconnect there, and no one has to even say anything. Just take a picture and you'll get it. And so I thought that was a very, very strange thing. Now, again, is Brian Sovryn saying you can't own guns? No, I'm not saying that. All right. I'm just saying that, take a look around and, kind of like Mark Twain, if you see, like Mark Twain said, if you suddenly find yourself in the majority, maybe you need to rethink your life a little bit and see what's going on. That's not his exact quote, but yeah, just look around and go, yeah, maybe this isn't like the kind of message I want to send out. So anyway, that was my initial, feeling of PorcFest, and I left again, albeit I had a great time. I did leave feeling a little cold. I felt I did not feel that I was in a peaceful gathering when I was there. But then let's fast forward to this year. How was PorcFest 2013? I didn't feel there were that many guns, nowhere near as many as last year. The weather, of course, was significantly cooler. It was actually, in my opinion, perfect weather. And also, that whole feel of a military base camp was gone. There weren't that many vendors. There was these guys who played I forget the name of they had a restaurant. They were actually kind of famous because they had been coming for a few years, and they'd have a chainsaw and they'd be, running the chainsaw and everything with the blade on, by the way. If it's an ad gimmick, there's no need to have a blade on the damn thing. They weren't there this year. So maybe that helped with the attitude, because a lot of, actually to the credit of a lot of people had a real problem with them being there. And that's probably why they just weren't welcomed this year. And so that wasn't there. The merchandise that was around, the swag, there wasn't a lot of it with a lot of those military tones. Like one shirt in particular from 2012 that I really didn't like. And I'm not saying Adam Kokesh was behind the shirt, but I thought this shirt was just so, over the top, overbearing in a really bad way. It had him doing, I guess Adam Kokesh has this famous stance that he takes where his hands are raised up and he's yelling, because yelling gets politicians to listen to you. But he has this stance where, you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure any of my listeners know what I'm talking about. and it was an olive drab shirt, and it said Marine take the hill, and then it said Adam or Kokesh for Senate or something. And again, beyond the ridiculousness of running for political office, the thing just had like this really like, we're going to take DC, when, let DC fall on its own. You know what I mean? There's no need to take the Capitol or take the Hill. But I didn't really I didn't see anything like that this year. And I felt overall a lot of people were, it definitely felt far more peaceful. I didn't get that vibe, that military vibe this year, or that militant vibe. I really didn't. And in fact, there was even there was kind of a debate on Thursday night's Free Talk Live from the week of PorcFest, where Chris Cantwell and Ian Freeman debated over, is violence, the way to freedom? And Chris Cantwell was pro-violence. Ian Freeman, of course, was not pro-violence. Credit to him. And I listened to it. I didn't see it live, but I listened to it, and I thought, Chris Cantwell's point just didn't hammer home. And there was, there's a live audience at PorcFest that you can hear that'll like cheer for something or laugh at something when you're saying something clever. And I was pleased that, and maybe people were just, they didn't know which way to go with all this, but I was pleased that like a lot of the times when Chris Cantwell would make statements that were very, that were like supposed to be gotcha statements, or they were supposed to be statements that were, for effect or something. I didn't hear any cheers or jeers. There was no response from the crowd. So maybe they were also captivated. Maybe there wasn't really a crowd there. Like I said, I didn't see it myself. But I was happy that like he wasn't getting like, rounds of applause for saying, no, the time's going to come when we got to raise arms. We got to pick up the guns, So that was comforting too. Other things with PorcFest, I mean, that's kind of like the main thing that I wanted to get out there, is that I did not feel that militant vibe, because that was so off-putting in 2012, and in 2013, it just, I didn't feel it. I really didn't. And, as far as other things, there was the Sex Dome, which is becoming, I think, very quickly notorious. That was there. The Sex Dome was being run by someone. It was way off, in the backfield of Rogers Campground, a good distance away from really any other camping sites. And that was really, really, really well done. I was very, very pleased with how that turned out. And it was a literal dome. Like this person constructed a dome, did a whole laser lighting system in there that turned out really, really well. I mean, it had this, and hopefully some of the listeners will get this reference, because it had such a Logan's Run feel to it. And in fact, I didn't get to talk to I'll call him the proprietor. I didn't get to talk to the proprietor about it, but I wondered if he didn't do it on purpose, if he didn't make it look like Logan's Run, because I agree. Logan's Run is such a sexy film. In fact, in many ways, other than Forbidden Planet, I consider it the only, like serious science fiction film that existed before Star Wars. And so it had that very Logan's Run vibe where, the music was nice, and, lots of, I mean, there wasn't, when I went there, and I only went in there for a few minutes, there wasn't any really big sexual acts going on. There were some people cuddling, a couple of people sleeping. There were nude men. All of which, I mean, everybody just acted very, very comfortable. There was a massage going on, being a very well done massage, I thought. There was, all kinds of just cool little things happening. People relaxing, and I really, you want to say it's not that big a deal, right? But at the same time, it's not so much a big deal to me, not in my mind, because, living like, or not, I don't want to say living that kind of way, just enjoying that kind of atmosphere. I mean, I can do that, and that's relatively second nature to me, because, to some degree, I don't know why that isn't more popular. I do know why it's not more popular, but, I would wish it to be a little more popular. But it was so nice to see lots of people who just went in there, and I think at first maybe you saw some shock on their faces, but then they just relaxed and they realized, hey, okay, this is fine. People can walk around naked. Men can rock out with their cocks out, and it's no problem. And that was really, really great. I don't think that can be overstated. And in fact, I'd almost want to say that more important than any of the talks, not that I did catch a talk with John Durant or some of it, and John Durant was very, very good at what he did. He had some vegetarian trolls on. John Durant, if you don't know, he's writing a book, I believe it's called The Paleo Manifesto, which is coming out in September. I will be grabbing a copy. I think it looks great. I'd also like to have him on this show. I may do that in the future. But he got trolled since he's big on the paleo diet and the paleo lifestyle, he got trolled by some vegetarians, and that was unfortunate, but that talk was good. But anyway, I think more than any of the talks, I think the Sex Dome made such a statement about personal liberty that just wasn't anywhere else. Outside of maybe the episode of Pork Therapy that was recorded live from there, which I happened to be on, and it was a fantastic episode. Stephanie had great guests on. She pulled off a great show. There were people, again, and all interrelated, because people were on there. That a guest was on there that came out and said she was bisexual. Which takes tremendous courage to do, especially at a campground in upstate New England, with 1,500, 1,600 people, that can hear it, because there's speaker systems that, you can hear it pretty well, or all, around the campground. So again, there was just this overall feeling of people achieving personal liberty. There wasn't so much political talk. Maybe if you went to the actual talks, you'd get that. But in the I almost want to say in the inner circles of PorcFest there, there was some real personal liberty going on. The Sex Dome was an important part of that. Pork Therapy was an important part of that. Another part of that was, and this is something else I want to talk about, was the Buzz's Big Gay Dance Party. And this is something I was a great time last year. I went to it. And it was a great time this year too. Some tremendous dancers. Really, seriously, great dancers. And just, people just having a good time. I actually had a green balloon, sticking out from my shorts, which, there was my big green, yeah. And there's some pictures out there. Maybe I'll ask the people who may have been, performing certain actions on my balloon of a on my balloon. I'll post them on the Tumblr page or something, or on sovryntech.com, which is technically a Tumblr page, but it's sovryntech.com. And so everybody was having a really good time. Everybody was joking around. People were dressed in really, really wild outfits. And this is, and when I contemplate that, the Big Gay Dance Party and the Sex Dome, here, a lot of people were like, so happy, especially at the Big Gay Dance Party. Every year this happens. Everybody's so happy that there's so many people who, probably the bulk of the crowd at the Big Gay Dance Party are straight people. And to have them supporting LGBT actions or whatever you want to call it, like the Big Gay Dance Party, or that they're just okay with the fact that people are gay, is incredible. That's great. How can you go wrong? But I want to take it a little bit further, because why can't people, like I said, if you were there, you saw it. You saw how people were dressed. You saw how people were acting. Okay. And it was just a great, great time. And my question is why can't they parlay that person who they were inside the tent? Because the Big Gay Dance Party is in this huge, big top tent. And parlay that into their normal life for the other 364 days and 364 and a quarter days of the year. Why can't they just let it all go all the time? And I understand why. I know how society pushes on people and, pretty much makes them conform, especially if you want to even just make some money. You got to follow the company rules. You got to, dress this certain way. Maybe even you have to wear a uniform, and you can't talk about this and you can't talk about that. And, so I get it. I know why. But equally, I wonder if people would even want to. And it's almost like, and I'm not the only person that brought this up. There was someone else who brought it up on the episode of Pork Therapy that was recorded at PorcFest. But do they just support LGBT issues for 3 hours, and then after that they go back to saying, making comments like, wow, that's gay, or all kinds of and just going back into the fold. And if they had, like, say, a gay coworker who was being discriminated against, they would just let it fly, and they wouldn't actually support him outside of there. And yeah, I don't know. I get the feeling that a lot of these people would say, no, so what if if this guy likes another guy, leave him alone. I really have the sense that most people that, especially that attended PorcFest, would do that. But again, why isn't everybody kind of letting their inner freak out that they allowed to come out at the big gay dance party? And I don't know, but I'd really like to see that. And there's places, and the reason I say, well, because you can say to me, well, there's over 1,000 people there. How do you know they don't do that? Quite frankly, I'm Facebook friends with a lot of them. And even on Facebook, and they hide their Facebook accounts from their employers, a lot of these people use totally different names, like something voluntarist, Lysander, Spooner, something, some crazy name that their employer is just never going to look up. Okay. So there's no need for them to be prudish or socially conservative, because the only people that are seeing it are, generally other friends or family perhaps. So why not just let it go? Why not let it all out? Why not have that big gay dance party be the order of the day? Yeah, you're not going to be dancing and having a good time. You got to go to work. Like I already said that. I know. I'm saying that why does it still feel like in every other circle of the liberty community, why does it all feel so conservative? Why does it all feel so socially, culturally, Christian conservative? That's one I don't have the answer for. If you have any thoughts, please email me, sovereigntech@hush.ai, or, get in touch with me through G+ or Twitter, you name it. I'm all over the place. Go to sovereigntech.com. I'll be right back with more.
Tech Roulette. Want to play?
It is time for Tech Roulette, and of course I always want to play. Tech Roulette is where I get stories, from listeners who, that you can send it. Again, I mentioned at the end of the last segment, sovereigntech.com, sovereigntech@hush.ai, all over the place. You can direct message me on Twitter. I've actually recently, I got to admit, I have been, not just on this show, but on other shows, I have been particularly harsh towards Twitter, partly because of the fact that when governments around the world tell them to take a tweet down, they do it. Partly because I didn't really understand it. I didn't get, and a lot of people make this critique that, 140 characters, you can't say enough in that. I disagree with that comment. But bottom line being is that I finally understand why Twitter is so amazing now. I totally get it. And it is so good. Still love Google+, still going to push Google+, as much as I can. I'm presently like insanely busy right now. So I used to post quite a bit. I'm not doing that so much right now. But like with Twitter, that's another advantage to Twitter actually, is the fact that like I can just tweet some, quick thought and get that out there. I mean, Twitter to me, like now that I understand what it is, it's pretty much texting en masse. It's like texting to the entire planet. And I think that's so cool. I think texting's great. It's way better than, actually oftentimes it's way better than talking on the phone. And I think there might be something to be said to the idea that if you can't say it in 140 characters, maybe you shouldn't say it. But yeah, I think it's amazing. The hashtag thing is amazing. It's perhaps the most, next to Tumblr, it's probably the most uncensored social media platform that I've ever seen. I mean, there are so many porn stars with Twitter accounts, and they actually tweet all the time. There's even a woman I saw on Twitter who she was at the tanning salon, and I guess on Twitter they have something called Titty Tuesday, which is on Tuesday. People post, women post pictures of their breasts, and she's just in the tanning salon and she just, posts a picture of herself, of her bare breasts. And I was like, wow, not so much that I need to see that. It's just a simple fact that a platform exists to where you can do that. Where someone who is comfortable with their sexuality can literally just let it out, kind of like what we were talking about with the big gay dance party. So I'm really starting, I think I really understand Twitter now, and I'm becoming quite the fan for many, many reasons. And if you want to know more about that, you can ask we have a listener email section on which we'll be doing later on in the show, on this show. And if you want to know more about my thoughts on Twitter, let me know. Because one other thing that's really great about Twitter is that I don't think you necessarily fall into the blank stare trap, where you end up like just looking at it for hours and hours. The information's so short and curt that you kind of can't look at it for hours, and so that's an interesting aspect to it as well. Anyway, let's get into the tech roulette. Let's get into the story that we ended up eeny, meeny, miny, mowing from the listeners. And this is from the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. It's an interesting name. Actually, this is from io9.com. So, and it's an older story. It's a good year old, really. But it's interesting. And it's prominent scientists signed declaration that animals have conscious awareness just like us. And I'll go ahead and start reading the article here. An international group of prominent scientists has signed the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness, in which they are proclaiming their support for the idea that animals are conscious and aware to the degree that humans are. A list of animals that include all mammals, birds, and even the octopus. But will this make us stop treating these animals in totally inhumane ways? While it might not sound like much for scientists to declare that many non-human animals possess conscious states, it's the open acknowledgement that's the big news here. The body of scientific evidence is increasingly showing that most animals are conscious in the same way that we are, and it's no longer something we can ignore. What's also very interesting about the declaration is the group's acknowledgement that consciousness can emerge in those animals that are very much unlike humans, including those that evolved along different evolutionary tracks, namely birds and some cephalopods. The absence of a neocortex does not appear to preclude an organism from experiencing affective states, they write. Convergent evidence indicates that non-human animals have the neuroanatomical, neurochemical, and neurophysiological substrates of conscious states, along with the capacity to exhibit intentional behaviors. Consequently, say the signatories, the scientific evidence is increasingly indicating that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. So how are they defining consciousness? What exactly does that mean? Consciousness is a funny thing because not a lot of people, no one actually, science can't really explain consciousness. Science, goes for, and I've mentioned this on the show before, but scientists go for, they get reeled for a loop when they start talking about consciousness, because it's such an incredibly difficult thing to explain. And it's very nature, and maybe even where it comes from, there aren't any answers to that. Everybody wants to instantly say, well, it's the brain, but that answer is just assuming. That's not actually proven. But anyway, so it's important to ask the question with all these scientists saying, what about consciousness and that other animals may have it. What do they mean by consciousness? And generally, the idea that they're talking about is that they have, say, emotions, or that they're not acting on instinct, that they're actually feeling like something. That when... I just had it and how to describe it. Let's keep going with the story. But the bottom line is that they're not just acting on instinct, like they're actually developing learned behaviors, not like Pavlov. They're actually like figuring things out. Okay. Consequently, say the group consists of cognitive scientists, neuropharmacologists, neurophysiologists, neuroanatomists, and computational neuroscientists, all of whom were attending the Francis Crick Memorial Conference on Consciousness in Human and Non-Human Animals. The declaration was signed in the presence of Stephen Hawking and included such signatories as Christoph Koch, David Edelman, Edward Boyden, Philip Lowe, Irene Pepperberg, and many more. The declaration made the following observations. The field of consciousness research is rapidly evolving. Abundant new techniques and strategies for human and non-human animal research have been developed. Consequently, more data is becoming readily available, and this calls for a periodic re-evaluation of previously held preconceptions in this field. Studies of non-human animals have shown that homologous brain circuits correlated with conscious experience and perception can be selectively facilitated and disrupted to assess whether they are in fact necessary for those experiences. Moreover, in humans, new non-invasive techniques are readily available to survey the correlates of consciousness. The neural substrates of emotions do not appear to be confined to cortical structures. In fact, subcortical neural networks aroused during affective states in humans are also critically important for generating emotional behaviors in animals. Artificial arousal of the same brain regions generates corresponding behavior and feeling states in both humans and non-human animals. Wherever in the brain one evokes instinctual emotional behaviors in non-human animals, many of the ensuing behaviors are consistent with experienced feeling states, including those internal states that are rewarding and punishing. Deep brain stimulation of these systems in humans can also generate similar affective states. Systems associated with affect are concentrated in subcortical regions where neural homologies abound. Young human and non-human animals without neocortices retain these brain-mind functions. Furthermore, neural circuits supporting behavioral, electrophysical states of attentiveness, sleep, and decision-making appear to have arisen in evolution as early as the invertebrate radiation, being evident in insects and cephalopod mollusks. Birds appear to offer in their behavior, neurophysiological and neuroanatomy, a striking case of parallel evolution of consciousness. Evidence of near human-like levels of consciousness have been most dramatically observed in African gray parrots. Now, the article doesn't mention it, but there is a very, very famous parrot that it didn't just talk. Okay, like it understood things. In fact, it seemed to even understand what death was. And this is that's very, very important, because it's one of those adages that's out there, is that like only humans know that they're going to die. Apparently not. And so is that consciousness? Is knowing that you have a finite life consciousness? I'd say so, but then that everybody, I guess, is their opinion is different. So yeah, this is an older article, and I'm bringing it up again because this is we do various specials on Sovryn Tech where it's not a usual episode. It's something I'll release in the middle of the week, and it'll be about a specific topic. Like the whole thing will be about one topic. And I did an episode about dolphins, and actually a really, really dear friend sent me a response to that special about dolphins, and should they be considered a person and not just an animal, because we're considered, humans are considered persons. Should dolphins fall under that, and should they have some degree of rights? Not getting into the idea of, do rights even exist, because I'm open to the fact that they may not. But I have not gotten to that email. That will be coming up. That's going to be a special on its own. Because it was such a well drawn out, thought out response to that special that I made, that it really, like, in the listener email section of the show, I've got about 10 minutes, to kind of bang out an answer, and there's no way I could give this the attention that I feel it deserves. So be looking out for that if you're interested in this. But this is why I thought this article was very, very interesting, and that's why, obviously, I'm sure why someone sent it to me, because it's bolstering the comment that I was making in the dolphin episode, where I was saying that, yeah, me, Brian Sovryn, I consider dolphins to be non-human persons. And now, one of my personal rules, just for me, is that I will not take another person's life. Because, for a multitude of reasons, but one of them being that how can I possibly gauge the value of another person's life? You can't. I don't think anybody can. And in that, so would I have to extend that, that thought of mine, that rule, that personal guiding rule of mine to dolphins? And I said, yes. I won't take part in a dolphin being killed. And would I even try to prevent it from happening? Yeah, if I was around, or you know what I mean? It's not something, I'm not doing dolphin activism, and saying give dolphins rights or anything like that. I'm not doing that at all. But then I'm not necessarily doing that for humans either. I guess I kind of am, but really this is, the activism I do is for me to have freedom in my own life. It's not necessarily, some kind of altruistic, action on my part. So anyway, so this is interesting. This is stuff. This is an article that I could have brought up, that I didn't in that special. And yeah, what is consciousness? That's a hard thing, because here's these scientists, and I'll play a little. I'll do a bit of a critique here, as much as I want to agree, with these scientists, or as much as I do agree with these scientists. I also, like, in this article, there's a picture of an elephant. There's amazing amounts of evidence, psychological evidence, that elephants suffer from PTSD. And all other kinds of mental conditions that most people just think are for humans. And so, yeah, I'm open to all the, to many, not just dolphins, but many animals possibly have a degree of consciousness. But I'll play the devil's advocate here. I'm really not playing the devil's advocate because I have the question, but how can you make a declaration of consciousness like this article is talking about when you don't know what consciousness is, or even where the seat of consciousness is? And I'm not saying there's a soul. Okay. Please don't be confused. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying. But if you don't know what consciousness is, how exactly can you, necessarily, scientifically, again, we're talking about scientists here, how can you scientifically, put it on to another creature if you can't very well explain it for yourself? You can, like I do, I am putting on the idea that, yes, at least dolphins have consciousness, and my actions will be, will live up to that measure with them. But how do you do that with I'm not making like this. I am making a scientific case, but I'm not like this professional scientist coming out and saying, no, guess what? This is fact. This is like Isaac Newton with the law of gravity, that these animals have consciousness. How do you make that statement again when you can't really define consciousness? So I'm a little skeptical on that. And also, of course, I'm skeptical on the fact that these people will want to have like the United Nations Charter protect these animals. I don't want to be protected by the United Nations Charter. Why would I want them to be? If I don't want it for myself. But as far as consciousness goes, I'll leave you with a few thoughts on that. This is something I've more recently been learning about, but it's very interesting that, and I didn't know this, but the heart, your heart, the human heart, actually creates a significant electromagnetic field. And that electromagnetic field, electromagnetic fields have effects on people. Now, I'm not talking about like, okay, well, you have a cell phone near you and it's totally messing with your metabolism, so don't sleep with a cell phone next to you. I'm not talking about anything like that. Okay. I'm just saying that, you do produce an electromagnetic field. Electromagnetic fields on certain frequency levels, can affect thought patterns. That's a fact. Okay. I mean, that's not woo-woo science, that's a fact. And I wonder if I think back, and a lot of people in the audience, I'm sure, understand this, because I think back to the ancient Egyptians. You understand why I do that, is my point. And with the ancient Egyptians, it's one of the odd things that they were so methodical when they would mummify people. But here's the weird part, is that they would essentially, they had these canopic jars with various gods on them, and they would put all these different pieces of waste into these canopic jars, and they treated like the brain like it was nothing. Like they'd essentially take the brain out and just toss it, because they didn't consider it to be worth anything. Now that's weird, because in various hieroglyphs you can see where the Egyptians look like they were doing like head transplants onto other creatures. But what they did, so it seems like they understood what the brain did in that regard. But here's the weird thing. They considered the heart the most important thing. And so is there a relationship with consciousness between the heart and the brain? There's a teaser for you. You can email me, sovereigntech@hush.ai, if you want to know more.
Wow. Oh. It's a website of the week.
It is time for Website of the Week, where I cover various websites that I consider useful or interesting, or just, sometimes it's even just something funny, or it might be a really atrocious website, though I don't think I've done an atrocious website yet. So if you're wondering if I've done one like worth staying away from, you don't have to go looking back to previous episodes of Sovereign Tech, because I'm pretty sure I've never done one with an atrocious that's a terrible website. This week this is an interesting kind of a new service that's coming out, and it's called TrustCloud. And TrustCloud, you go to trustcloud.com, and what it's trying to do is something that I think is very, very important, especially for the digital age, where we need to build up like reputation systems, okay? And sort of what they're saying, with the idea of reputation systems, is that we're in like a sharing economy where people don't necessarily have to own something, like say a car. If you live in an area where, like say Keene, New Hampshire, where you can literally walk anywhere within like a half hour. I mean, you can walk anywhere. do you really need a car there? But then what if you wanted to go to Manchester for some kind of like Bitcoin meetup or something? Okay, you need a car. And so what TrustCloud does, it gives you it creates this card, and you can sign it, you log in, you make an account there, and it starts creating for you via like data that you share and, and all this. You have to see it to believe it. What it does is it creates a reputation system so that when, say, kind of like Airbnb, if you know what Airbnb is, that's been talked about on this show. Mike Elgin, who is a guest on the show, actually traveled the world with Airbnb, where pretty much, a person puts up a room and says, and they get rated as they rent it out to people. And so is it a good room? And then, they can make a lot of money if they're not there to use that room, or even a full house. And so this is very similar to that, in that it creates this reputation system, but it's a reputation system that works across like all these different services. I mean, like eBay. Okay, eBay has the seller ranking, seller score, or a buyer score. You have reputation there, and that's very, very important. If a person has like 75%, you're going to be very, very sketched out by buying anything from them. And so TrustCloud.com is taking that and just kind of putting it on steroids and having it work across all these different websites. And I think that's pretty cool. I think if you sign up for this, it's interesting, because who knows where it could be useful. And I've heard people using this for parts of the Bitcoin economy. I've heard people, using this for all kinds of different things. It's definitely something that, again, the digital age really, really needs, because, I don't think that there's like privacy in the digital world. And so the best, one of the best things you can have is reputation. And here it is. This is making your online reputation. Is this something that's going to be, the hackers are going to take advantage of? Well, maybe. But right now, it's more about sharing stuff than it is giving you something that you keep. So check it out, trustcloud.com. It's in beta right now, but I think this may be a big part of the future of the internet, because we don't know where the internet's going yet. We just don't. I'll be back with more.
Time now for 90 Seconds on Sex with Dr. Paul.
Most guys enjoy their penis whether it's soft or hard, but few understand what happens inside their penis as it goes from limp to ready for action. Well, the penis has 3 long chambers inside of it. 2 of the chambers are responsible for making it hard or rigid. They're called the corpus cavernosa. They run parallel to each other up the shaft of the penis. Think of a double-barrel shotgun, and that's how they sit next to each other. These 2 chambers or cylinders are made of spongy material that are covered by a thin but extremely tough exterior. To get an erection, they fill up with blood. As a result, the blood pressure in an erect penis is way higher than the blood pressure in the rest of the body. The 3rd chamber, which runs along the underside of the penis, is made up of a similar spongy tissue that encircles the urethra, or the tube that you pee and ejaculate through. And while this 3rd cylinder expands during erection, it doesn't get hard or rigid like the other 2 tubes. If it did, it would crimp shut the urethra, and there's no way a guy could ejaculate through it. This 3rd column, which is called the corpus spongiosum, also forms the head of the penis. And as you might already know from personal experience, the head of the penis expands or mushrooms during erection, but stays relatively soft.
For more, visit 90secondsonsex.com.
It is time for listener email, where I answer the questions that get sent to me through the various channels that Sovryn Tech provides. You can go to sovryntech.com to find all of those, or you can go to soundcloud.com/SovrynTech. And the really cool thing about SoundCloud is that at SoundCloud, you can actually, you can post right on to the podcast. So, say you have a question about something I said on minute 48 of episode 13 of Sovryn Tech. You can actually post right in that. I'll get an email telling me what you said, and you can ask the question about it. And that actually kind of makes it easy for me, because then I can look back and remember exactly what I said. Because admittedly, 28 episodes in and a bunch of specials and whatever else, it's amazing, but I can't remember everything I've done on this show, like everything I've covered. But anyway, so you can do that too. But let's get into this. This question actually came from Google Plus, and it was, just a listener asking, hey, here's a question for you. How did you get into, technology? How did you, and he was asking, were you, and by the way, I keep you anonymous unless you specifically say, I want you to name me. I will keep you anonymous, other than the he, she thing. That's kind of difficult to keep from using pronouns. But he asked, how did you get into technology? He also asked, am I an IT professional? Am I an IT professional? Yeah, I was actually a technician at PAR Technologies. I was more than a technician there, but I was a technician for a while. In the military, I did a lot of IT work. So, but I never really went to like any, I didn't do any college, for IT. But anyway, so there, it's not like it was necessarily, I guess, yes, it was a profession of mine. But that's not where my passion came from. But a fair question. And where those professions were, available to me because of my passion for technology, science and technology as a child. The whole reason, now in the household I grew up in, we always had computers. Now, I was born in 1981. Okay. And there was just always a computer around. If it wasn't an Apple, there was even an Apple Lisa in the house. Apple Lisa in the house. There was an Apple Lisa in the house. There's an Apple II. We had a Commodore 64. I loved the fucking Commodore 64. That may be like the greatest computer ever built. What an ingenious device. This is totally, in fact, you look at like the Mac Mini that was used to be really popular. I guess it still kind of is, but the Mac Mini was just a total ripoff of the Commodore 64. And the Mac Mini was said to kind of, revolutionize and revitalize and bring Mac OS, bring OS X to the people, to the average person. The Commodore 64 was definitely very, very important in bringing, computers to the people. So we had a Commodore 64, which again was just awesome. Now, all right, why did the Commodore 64 bring computers to the people? Well, because the Commodore 64 could just hook up to your television. It didn't have to, it didn't need to hook up to a special CRT monitor. It could hook up to your television. It was also really cool because you could kind of do everything on it. It had lots of games. It had lots of great, great games. This is before, like DOS was the game system of choice, in the 90s. It had tons of great 8-bit games that you can actually, they're so popular that on the Wii, the Nintendo Wii, they had a virtual console where you could play like old games. There was an entire section for Commodore 64. That's how important these games were back then. So it was like the first computer that, it was a game system. It hooked up to it could hook up to anything, had the keyboard built in, all that, and it could do everything else that a computer could normally do. It could even connect to primitive forms of networking way back when. Which is pretty cool. So the Commodore 64 was, that was like the computer that really said to me, okay, this is going to allow me to achieve my dreams. And I was like 6 years old, 7 years old, but I can readily remember thinking that, wow, with the Commodore 64, I can do anything. I can draw because I have no artistic talent, but with the Commodore 64, I could draw a picture of a snowmobile. So, albeit very primitive, but I could do it. And to someone at that age, it's very important. So it was that. It also had word processing, which that's the key. I mean, and it had the video games, which obviously there's a section of Sovryn Tech called Game Talk, and I've always called it my favorite section because I love video games. I really do. And so, the Commodore 64 provided for video game playing. But then again, the real key was word processing, because I wanted to write. I wanted to create my own stories. I wanted to, writing was just so, when I was really young, was just so quintessential to me. Because I knew, I've been reading forever, almost as far back as I can remember, I've been reading. And, I wanted to create that. And so that's really, in a lot of ways, what got me into technology, what got me into computers, was that this is the way to write, because I don't have to buy paper. I don't have to buy ink cartridges, or ink. Now I forget what they call it on the typewriter, but I don't have to buy, no parts required, and my parents are paying the electric bill, so I need this computer. I got to get that, and then everything from there out, everything is just done digitally, and I can do it forever. And so eventually I get a computer that's a 386. It was a 386SX, which I later upgraded to a 486DX, and that computer lasted me for years. And again, it all started, I learned DOS. I learned how to, initially it was just DOS. I didn't have Windows 3.1 on there. But, so we're talking the early 90s. But with DOS, to do word processing on there, if you weren't using Lotus 123, you had to use the DOS editor. And which was great, because that taught me how to write in the auto exec. That taught me how to write batch files. That taught me everything I needed to know about, how a computer operates, was just from my desire to want to write stories. That's it. That's totally how I got into technology. Now one can say that, I enjoyed technology, say, on Star Trek, which is also very, quintessential in my life, that I enjoyed Star Trek. And so I wanted to write stories about technology. So really my love for technology existed before I wanted to write stories, or it's what made me want to write stories. Yeah, maybe that's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. But that's again, my whole passion for, how I got into technology, how I got into, doing so many different things with the technology field, not just working in it, but just, say more paying attention to it, to the point where, I'm doing a podcast about it. All that stems from just, again, from the desire to write, and video games. Video games are important too, because, and why would video games get somebody into technology? Well, back then, if you wanted to, in the 90s, if you wanted to play the latest and greatest game, if you wanted the best graphics, because, graphics used to matter. Now it seems like, that's great that graphics don't matter anymore, because really they don't matter. What matters is great gameplay, Super Meat Boy is not a graphical powerhouse of a game, but it's one of the best games to come out in the past 10 years. So, graphics don't matter. But back then, graphics were that's the first thing you talked about. There used to be a magazine called Game Pro, and they would do, listing replayability, graphics, sound, all this stuff. Graphics was always the first one, because that's what everybody cared about. How did the game look? Did it get close to looking real? Was everything really amazing? Were April O'Neil's boobs big enough in, in the Turtles games? And that's actually a point of contention. But, so graphics were a big deal. And if you wanted, if you wanted, you're talking to your friend again, I'm a kid at this point, or even a teenager. If you wanted to talk to your friend, about games, you had to start talking about graphics, and the best way to get graphics was not on the Super Nintendo. It was not on the Sega Genesis. It was on PC. That's where you were getting the great looking games. That's where you're getting the 3D games way before the PlayStation ever came out. You have your X-Wing, TIE Fighter, also the Blade Runner game that Westwood put out years ago, which is an incredible game. You had the Wing Commander games, which are just so epic in scale because, how much of a story, there's exceptions. Like there's a Nintendo game called Chrysalis. If you've never played that, check that out. It's a great game. It's one of those hidden treasures, hidden because it came out really late in the Nintendo's history. But it's an RPG and it tells a full story. It's really, really deep. But most games back then didn't do that. As to where on the PC, oh yeah, the stories, you could go forever because as long as your hard drive was big enough, the game could just keep going. And a lot of times they would. You'd get expansion packs. That was another exciting thing with PCs, is that there was expansion packs that okay, fine, you hashed out $50 for the game, and if you bought it for a console, it was over after that $50. You had to wait for the sequel. As where with PC, a year later, you hash out $10 and you get a whole new game because there's an expansion pack that runs off of the original one that you installed. So PC gaming was a big deal, and to game on a PC, you had to have some real technical knowledge. Like I had to learn, if I wanted to play Duke Nukem 3D in DOS, I had to turn off the high mem. Some of my listeners will know what I mean by that. It'd take forever to explain it. But I would have to turn off the high mem on my computer, okay? And there's a whole command line that you have to do to make that, to be able to do that. And so that, just in the fact that I wanted to say play a game as well, is what got me into technology. It's what gave me, I was essentially forced. I had to learn how to use this stuff at its bare bones. There was no Steam back then. You couldn't just say, buy and install. You couldn't do that back then. That didn't exist. You had to do some real work. To make a game work, to be able to play a game on a PC. So that's where a lot of my technical knowledge came from. So all of it was just different desires. I wanted to play these incredible games that were only on PC back then. And so I had to learn a lot about computers to be able to do that. And I wanted to write stories. And, roundabout, I ended up having to learn a lot about computers to do that too. Also, I'll admit to this. When I was, I guess 12, 13, 14, I used to write I wrote erotica back then. With comic book characters and things like that. I've been a perv forever. And so I obviously didn't want, there was always a few computers in the house, but there was always that one main computer that everybody kind of used. And I needed to hide that from my parents. So again, learned a lot about security and computers that way. Anyway, hope that answers the question how I got into technology. It's all about passion. And I'll be back with more.
Hey, look! Got an energy spike.
Launch.
No!
In the third age of mankind, an age plagued by an evil empire that seeks to destroy humanity. It is our last, best hope for peace. It is Babylon 5.
All fighter squadrons launched.
Get us out of here.
Return fire.
Well, freeze them!
Watch Babylon 5.
You can watch Babylon 5 and experience the greatest show in television history. See the entire series completely free by going to thewb.com/shows/Babylon 5.
Software of the Week.
It is time for Software of the Week, where I cover various pieces of software that I find useful, or now I'm going to add a little something to it, where it may be a piece of software that I'm intrigued by that's being released and that maybe I haven't even really used yet. So this kind of falls under a tech roulette, because this was actually submitted to the Sovereign Tech Belnea. And you can find that. It's a community on Google+. I love Google+ communities. Just amazing things you find there. And this was shared by a listener, a member of the Belnea. And it's from TechCrunch. And its new iOS app lets you record what you heard 5 minutes ago. Whoa. Have you ever wished that you could record something that already happened? Your kid's first words, that perfectly timed comeback, the email address your boss told you to have those important documents sent to within the next 10 minutes. If only there was a way to record the important bits of your life without having to record all of it. That's the idea behind Herd. That's the name of the program, H-E-A-R-D, a new app for iOS. Herd constantly records the audio around you into an ephemeral, self-destructing buffer, saving only those fleeting moments that you deem worthy. Once you open Herd, it immediately begins recording everything within earshot of the iPhone's microphone. Rather than dumping all that audio into one incredibly boring and incredibly long file, though, Herd records into a constantly rotating buffer. If something happens that you just have to save, you pop into the app and tap a single button, boom, it's saved. Do nothing, and the buffer is erased. That audio instantly disappearing into the digital ether. Herd will continue to record audio even when running in the background, albeit with a big old red recording banner placed up at the top of your screen. Once recorded, clips can be named, tagged, emailed, or shared on Facebook. Herd just launched last week, and they're testing a freemium model to begin with. Out of the box, the free app records up to 12 seconds of the past. Not a whole lot, but enough to help you wrap your head around the concept. Pay $1.99 for the bigger audio buffer in-app purchase, and you can bump the recording buffer up to 30 seconds, 1 minute, or 5 minutes. Now, before you shout, "Oh my God, spy app, NSA Prism, think about it. If someone is actively trying to record you saying something incriminating, this wouldn't be a very good app for it. It would offer no advantage in that case over iOS's built-in voice memo recorder, which, like this app, can record while running in the background, or even a cheapo tape recorder, but multiple disadvantages. The 5-minute limit, the need to tap the save button without anyone noticing. Still, anyone using the app should always make sure everyone being recorded is fully aware. In some states, not doing so could get you into sticky legal situations. You can find Herd in the App Store. So there, Herd. This is really, really interesting stuff. And you know, I agree. If someone's like instantly thinking, "Oh man, they're spying on me and they're recording it all," why wouldn't they just do that on the fly with, you know, the microphone in iOS anyway? You know, just do it. You don't need an app. You don't need a specific app to do it. This is merely like maybe you using something that maybe the NSA is already doing. Fine. But I thought it was very, very interesting, you know, and I have no idea, and I haven't found any reviews on it, onto whether or not, you know, how it drains the battery. Now, again, it's only been out barely a week. This article's from June 23rd, 2013. So I don't know, but I mean, the microphone maybe wouldn't take that much battery, but yeah, I don't know. So that's the only thing. If you have it like running all the time, and I'm glad that it has the little bar across the top. I'm sure somebody will write a script so that goes away if you have a jailbroken iPhone. You know, to where it's saying that, yeah, you know, this is recording. But I can see this could be pretty useful in police encounters. I mean, this is a technology that, like, there's that, what is it, Freedom Cam that gets touted on Free Talk Live. This could be used like that. So not a bad thing in my opinion. I'm very intrigued to see how this goes. And if I get to use it, I'll give you a review.
What does freedom mean? Tune in to LRN.FM to find out. LRN.FM is the Liberty Radio Network, a collection of live talk radio and podcasts, all coming from a principled pro-liberty perspective. LRN.FM show hosts aren't left, right, or conspiracy kooks. You can tune in 24/7 to LRN.FM via your phone, computer, satellite, and more. Listen free anytime at LRN.FM. That's LRN.FM.
Brian! Stop playing those video games!
Just a minute, Mom.
Game Talk.
It is time for Game Talk, where, yeah, I talk about the thing that, as I mentioned in the listener email section of the show, is one of, you know, games are one of the things that got me into technology, and, you know, and that I still very much enjoy. It's interesting, you know, why do people like love video games, especially kids? Why do they love video games? And I think part of it is that we live in a society that really shelters us. quite a bit, from everything. It shelters us from outside. Don't go out the door. I mean, there's so much of that going on, and video games create an interactive world in which you have freedom. How can a kid not want that? How can a kid not want to just jump on it, and put their entire heart and soul into something that essentially lets them live for once, and not in fear, because they have control of their actions. They have control of what's going on, whatever. And so a lot of people ask, why are kids into video games? I think that's a big part of it, is because they're so controlled by society at large, and they're so held down from doing anything that actually matters to them or that they'd want to do, that video games open that up and say, oh no, I can take action. Which is, I mean, that's pretty exciting. It's sad, in a world where, kids were free to more or less do what they wish and to develop into, adults, would video games be as big a deal? Yeah, they probably still would be, but it might be for different purposes, and who knows what those games would even look like. This article this week is from Kotaku, and speaking of society at large holding people down, the story is Alien Anal Probe gets Saints Row 4 banned in Australia. Oh my. Yesterday, news broke that Saints Row 4 had been refused classification by the Australian Classification Board, and we've just received a copy of the report. According to a statement from the Classification Board, the game was refused classification as a result of implied sexual violence. Now we can confirm that the report states the following. The game includes a weapon referred to by the applicant as an alien anal probe. The applicant states that this weapon can be shoved into enemies' backsides. The lower half of the weapon resembles a sword hilt, and the upper part contains prong-like appendages which circle around what appears to be a large dildo which runs down the center of the weapon. When using this weapon, the player approaches a clothed victim from behind and thrusts the weapon between the victim's legs and then lifts them off the ground before pulling a trigger which launches the victim into the air. After the probe has been implicitly inserted into the victim's anus, the area around their buttocks become pixelated, highlighting that the aim of the weapon is to penetrate the victim's anus. The weapon can be used during gameplay on enemy characters or civilians. In the board's opinion, a weapon designed to penetrate the anus of enemy characters and civilians constitutes a visual depiction of implied sexual violence that is interactive and not justified by context, and as such the game should be refused classification. Whew. The report also made mention of the use of illicit drugs. The game contains an optional mission which involves the player obtaining and smoking drugs referred to as alien narcotics. Smoking the alien narcotics equips the player with superpowers, which increase their in-game abilities, allowing them to progress through the mission more easily. According to the report, these are the two main reasons why Saints Row 4 has been refused classification. Now, it's being refused classification. That's kind of like in the United States, we have the ESRB, and that's where it says what age group is this good for? And if a game in Australia gets refused classification, that's essentially saying it's rated X, it's XXX. And no parent will essentially, or almost no parent essentially, will allow a kid to have that game. So it's effectively banned. The phraseology in Australian law doesn't say that it's banned. It just says that, hey, this isn't, we can't give this a classification. Nobody should dare play it. Which is ridiculous, outright. I mean, it really is. All it takes is someone like Kotaku to do a report and just say that, hey, wow, this is interesting. In this game review, in the game review that, say, Kotaku would do, they would mention that you can actually take a dildo, and shove it up someone's ass and send them a-flying. And that would be enough. There doesn't need to be any government action. No one has to say, oh, this is banned or this is not going to get classified because it's just far too crass, far too, outlandish. That's just not necessary. And parents would know, or if you're of the Christian bent, all it would take is for World Net Daily or whatever that's called, worldnews.net or something. It's like a Christian news site. I'm so happy that I can't remember the name of it. All it would take is for them to announce it. And guess what? Every parent that wouldn't want their kid to play this because of an anal probe, they'd know. Really, they'd know. And you'd say, well, what if they don't have the internet and they don't know? You have a PlayStation 3 and you don't have the internet? Really? At least at some point, somewhere, you don't have the internet? I understand when you have like data limits, but yeah. Anyway, so, that's ridiculous. Now, am I for, alien anal probe or weapons that, that get crammed up a person's ass, involuntarily? Am I supporting that? No, not at all. Okay. I do admit that that's kind of offensive. I get the humor of it, and in fact, on the article, and you can find the article in the show notes, there's a picture that I know very, very well, and it's a picture of Cartman from South Park on a medical table when he was kidnapped by aliens. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, that's like the first episode of South Park. That's why I know it so well, because when everybody first saw South Park in the 90s, everybody was like, whoa, what did I just watch? So it was pretty memorable. And so, and it was, I'll admit, I laughed very, very hard at Cartman having an anal, having an alien anal probe that would come out of his ass every time he farted. So, I can get the humor behind it. And the Saints Row games, they're not serious at all. They are completely outlandish. They're designed to be that. I mean, they're the ultimate in sandbox gaming. Okay, it's not even like Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto sandbox gaming means essentially you can do anything, in the game, and that you don't even really have to play the mission or the story. You can just do whatever you want. And this was popularized by Grand Theft Auto, but Grand Theft Auto had a point, and there were limitations, real world limitations, as to where it was Saints Row, and they're on the fourth one now. It's a very popular series. Saints Row has always been just ridiculous. It's not to the point of Gary's Mod, but it's pretty close to where you can just invent the most insane things, and the laws of physics no longer apply. No laws apply, which can be exciting in and of itself. So it's meant to be a crazy game. And, I don't want to be on the fine line of this and say that, well, if you don't like the alien anal probe, you don't have to buy it from the store in the game. But, that's there, that is a fact, and it's true. The other interesting thing is that they're caring about drugs being in the game. I'm kind of shocked, because almost every Space Marine game that comes out, and there's plenty of Space Marine games, be it Halo or whatever. Halo might not do this, but plenty of the other ones do, where they have stim packs where it's essentially drugs, to make military soldiers better. Oh, I guess the government doesn't have a problem with that. They just don't like the idea of alien narcotics that give you superpowers that, in this unlawful world of Saints Row 4 that let you do all this stuff. I mean, that's crazy. There was even, you could eat mushrooms in Rise of the Triad in 1994, I think it was. I mean, come on. These things have always been there. Anyway, just the ridiculousness of governments and behind the times. I'll be back with more.
Are you searching for a mouth-watering, all-natural, sweet and sticky treat? What if I told you it was also made by a chef who believes in freedom, just like you? You're not dreaming. This is real. Head over to mandrik.com. That's MANDRIK.com. There, you'll find Georgia's famous baklava in classic and dark chocolate flavors. To those with special health needs, Georgia's famous baklava also has a treat for you. Golden delicious, low-carb, gluten-free almond cookies. Order with PayPal or Bitcoins. In just a few days, your sweet treats will await you right at your doorstep. One more time, that's MANDRIK.com for Georgia's famous baklava. Hacker Stories.
It is time for Hacker Stories, where we cover security issues, where we talk about some of the real heroes of the planet, that being hackers or even some IT professionals like a guy named Snowden, who's really all over the news right now, that being Edward Snowden. Real quick, a comment I haven't seen anybody really make is, and I understand why you don't want to make it because it sounds conspiratorial, but I find it interesting that all this Edward Snowden stuff comes out while Bradley Manning is effectively on trial, and there's very little news coming out about that, just because like all the news, all the news organizations are all concentrating on Edward Snowden now, and why that is, hey, I don't know, it's just coincidence, I guess. This article's from the blog Buzz Machine, and it does have to do with Edward Snowden. It has to do with more the journalism side of things, and it's by Jeff Jarvis, who's a really great journalist himself. Really, he's also a writer. He's a professor as well, I believe, and he's well known for being on This Week in Google on the Twit network. That's twit.tv. If you ever want to get some really great tech podcasts, or watch some awesome television, you can go to twit.tv, and you're just going to get tremendous entertainment and really information too. You're going to learn a lot. So Jeff Jarvis wrote this up, and I want to read it. It's from June 17th, 2013, and it's all journalism is advocacy, or it isn't. And I thought this was really interesting. Jay Rosen wrote an insightful post forking the practice of journalism into politics, none, that is traditional American journalism, objective it thinks, and politics, some, that is the kind just practiced by Glenn Greenwald and The Guardian. So the idea that, there's some journalism has to do with politics, and other journalism, puts politics into it. Jay catalogs the presumptions and advantages of each. As both he and the New York Times' Margaret Sullivan observe, Edward Snowden took his leaks to Greenwald and The Guardian because they exemplify politics some. I want to take this farther and argue first that what Greenwald and The Guardian were practicing was less politics than advocacy, and second, that all journalism is advocacy, or is it journalism? To the first point, Greenwald and The Guardian were not bolstering their own politics in the NSA story. To the contrary, Greenwald and The Guardian both identify politically as liberal. The Guardian's mission is to be nothing less than the world's leading liberal voice. Yet they attacked programs run and justified by a liberal American administration, and no doubt caused that administration discomfort or worse. In so doing, Greenwald and The Guardian exhibited the highest value of journalism: intellectual honesty. That does not mean that they were unbiased. It means that they were willing to do damage to their political side in the name of truth. Greenwald and The Guardian were practicing advocacy, not for politics, not for their team, but for principles: protection of privacy, government transparency and accountability, the balance of power, and the public's right to know. Now, to my second point, seen this way, isn't all journalism properly advocacy? And isn't advocacy, and on behalf of principles and the public, the true test of journalism? The choices we make about what to cover and how we cover it and what the public needs to know are acts of advocacy on the public's behalf. Don't we believe that we act in their interest? As James Carey said, the God term of journalism, the be-all and end-all, the term without which the enterprise fails to make sense, is the public. When the Washington Post, whose former editor famously refused to vote to uphold his vision of Jay's politics none ethic, meaning they're not involved in politics, chooses to report on government secrecy or on abuse of veterans at a government hospital, or of course on presidential malfeasance and cover-ups, it is of course advocating. When an editor assigns reporters to expose a consumer scam or Wall Street fraud or misappropriation of government funds, That's advocacy. When a newspaper takes on the cause of the poor, the disadvantaged, the abused, the forgotten, or just the little guy against the man, that's advocacy. When health reporters tell you how to avoid cancer or even lose weight, that's advocacy on your behalf. I might even argue that a critic reviewing a movie to save you from wasting your money on a turkey could be advocacy, though we don't necessarily need critics for that anymore. But what about a TV station sending a crew or a helicopter to give us video of the fire du jour? Tragic accident with no lesson to be learned. Is that advocacy? No. When a TV network, not to pick on TV, devotes hours and hours to the salacious details of, say, the Jodi Arias crime, which affects none of our lives, is that advocacy? No. When an online site collects pictures of cute cats, is that advocacy? Hardly. But it is annoying. That's me saying that. Anyway, when a newspaper devotes resources to covering football games, is that advocacy? No. Is any of that journalism under the test I put forth here? No. So what is it then? The stuff we call journalism that doesn't advocate for people or principles, that doesn't serve the public need? At worst, it's exploitation, audience, or sales, or click, or ratings bait. At best, it's entertainment. The first is pejorative. The second need not be as entertainment. Whether a journalistic narrative, or a book, or a show, or a movie can still inform and enlighten. But if it doesn't carry information that people can use to better organize their lives or their society, I'd say it fails the journalism test. Journalism as advocacy has been bundled with journalism as entertainment for economic reasons. Entertainment can draw people to a media entity and help subsidize the cost of its journalism. But it was a mistake to then put an umbrella over it all. If a newspaper creates journalism, then everything its journalists create in that newspaper is journalism, right? No. The corollary, people who are not journalists can do journalism. It's a function of the value delivered, not the job title. Why does that seem like a definitional hair-splitting matter? Because when a whistleblower knocks on your door, you must decide not whose side you're on, but whom and what principles you serve. This is a way to recast the specific argument journalists are having now about whether Snowden is a hero or a traitor. Wrong question. As a journalistic organization, The Guardian had to ask whether the public had a right to the information Snowden carried, no matter which side it benefited, so long as the public's interests in terms of security were not harmed. I disagree with that, but anyway, the next issue for The Guardian was whether and how it adds journalistic value. That is, of course, another journalistic test. Edward Snowden, like WikiLeaks, delivered a bunch of raw and secret documents. In both cases, news organization added value by using judgment to redact what could be harmful, bringing audience to the revelation, and most important, adding reporting to this raw information to verify and explain. Based on his Q&A with the Guardian audience, I'd say that Snowden is proving to be big on rhetoric and perhaps guts, but less so on specifics. I still am not clear how much direct operational knowledge he has, or whether he, like Bradley Manning, simply had access to documents. So more reporting was and still is necessary. This Associated Press story is a good example of taking time to add reporting context and explanation to Snowden's still unclear and still debated documents. Both these organizations made their decisions about what to reveal and what to report based on their belief that we have a right and a need to know. That's journalism, and that's advocacy. Brilliant. A couple finer points I disagree with in there with Jeff Jarvis, like the idea that, well, if information's raw data, there's no need for that really to ever be so much covered up, especially by governments, because they're going to hide the worst stuff in the world, right? But anyway, this is fascinating stuff. And I love the idea because this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. Hackers unleash a lot of this information that tells us that the government is doing something dastardly to us. But hackers can't necessarily, like Snowden, like he's saying with Snowden's not like putting out, like he's not disseminating the information well, but he's just providing it. And that's where we need people like podcasters and like you were saying, journalists, advocates, who can push out this information that the hackers collect. Very, very important thought. I'll be back with more.
This is Stephanie Murphy, Sovereign Tech Producer. You may know me from this show, but did you know that I have my own podcast? It's called Porc Therapy. Porc Therapy is a bit different from other shows. We cover current events, big ideas, and even relationship issues, all through the lens of how we can get more freedom in our lives. Oh, and you'll love Sex and Science Hour. Join me on my website, porctherapy.com. That's porctherapy.com. Now back to Sovereign Tech.
What are you doing? I can't believe I caught you again. You know, Jesus doesn't approve of this little habit of yours.
I know, baby, I know it's wrong, but it feels so right.
Well, it ain't.
But I've been doing it since I was 12 years old.
It's nothing but a sinful perversion of nature, if you ask me.
But baby, I don't ever want to stop looking at tech websites, new gadgets, video games, software, or any of that stuff.
Well, then I'm leaving.
Okay. Bye.
Pick of the week.
It is time for Pick of the Week, where I get to choose pretty much anything I want to talk about. And it can be, like, it could be a movie, it could be a TV show, it could be a comic book, it could be a piece of software, it could be a piece of hardware, could be just a topic that I find really interesting. It can literally be anything. Of course, one could make the argument that the whole show can be about anything that I want it to be about, but that's not entirely accurate, because there's a lot of sections to the show that I give you, or at least there's a couple where I give, the listener audience control of the show on what they want to, what they're interested in and what they want to hear. And I consider that very important to do, because this isn't just, yes, I make the show, to be very entertaining to me, but I want it to be entertaining to you as well. And so with Pick of the Week this week, before I get into this week's Pick of the Week, and it's a great one, I've gotten feedback about sharing what's called Star Trek Continues. You can find it at StarTrekContinues.com, where this group of fans are very, very excellent filmmakers of fans, are making new episodes of the original series of Star Trek, new actors obviously. And I've gotten feedback from people, and some of the people are just writing back in, or even coming up and talking to me and just saying, thank you so much for telling me about that, because that just made my month. And I am so happy to hear that. Please do not hesitate to send me little bits of feedback. If I don't get back with you right away, it's all right. It's just, but that doesn't mean that I'm not listening. I read every email. So, I'm glad people have enjoyed that, because I certainly enjoyed it. It quite frankly, it touched me very deeply. I'm being very serious when I say that. When I watched Star Trek Continues, it was that good. And that well done. So anyway, let's get into this week's Pick of the Week, which happens to be another television show. And it's one I don't believe I've talked about, before, or at least I've not done it for Pick of the Week, but it's definitely a show I've talked about. And in fact, I even think it's almost become a way of, I've noticed now I co-host Sunday nights on Free Talk Live, and I noticed that some people will call in and start talking about Spartacus. And so the television show, the recent television show that actually just ended this year, called Spartacus. And I've noticed that some people will call in and say, I am Spartacus. And so I wonder if they're kind of giving me a direct shout out, like saying, yeah, hey, hey, Brian Sovryn, I listen to your stuff. And if so, thank you. That's very kind of you. That's cool. And I'm more than willing to keep running with it. But anyway, that all comes from what I consider to be one of the, now there's an ad in the show for Babylon 5, which is, I consider, the greatest show in television history. That's exactly what the ad says. But Spartacus kind of takes it to the next level. It's not better than Babylon 5, because I don't think you can walk away with, with as much, kind of intellectual weight as you can from Spartacus doesn't have as much intellectual weight as Babylon 5 does. Doesn't have nearly as much story, partly because, of course, Spartacus is to some degree based on events that really happened a couple thousand years ago. But the show is what it does offer is it offers what I consider pretty much the finest raw entertainment. Again, not a whole lot of intellectual weight. There's some of that. There's certainly a lot of emotional weight. But it offers the finest entertainment. I think that not even just television, but really movies or any visual medium has ever provided. It is a show, and it's kind of an anachronism for me, because it is an incredibly violent show, and I am not a violent person by any means. But I do enjoy this show, but it's not, I really don't enjoy it for the violence. I imagine there's people who always say that sort of, well, I'm not into the violence. Or like there's people who say, yeah, I read Playboy for the articles. I don't look at the pictures or whatever. No, I watch Spartacus for the sex, and I watch it for the, so I'm saying I'm looking at Playboy for the pictures, I guess you could say. But my point is that the reason that the show I consider such incredible entertainment is because it is outside of the incredibly violent nature, but bear in mind, it is depicting an incredibly violent time. And it's depicting very, incredibly unfortunate events. So it's not being it's not being violent necessarily for violence sake. Yes, that's part of it, but there's a point to the violence because, historically this is what happened. Anyway, the point I'm getting at, the main key to why I think Spartacus is so great and such incredible entertainment is because it is the first show that I've ever seen that is on the next level of cultural consciousness, I guess I'll say, of cultural, I'm not exactly sure what word I want to use there, but it takes it to the next level because there's gay characters, there's tons of gay characters, there's bi characters, LGBT, it's LGBT alphabet soup everywhere. And they don't treat it like it's a big deal. Like it's just normal. That's how it is. Like, okay, guys, fuck guys. Great. Do it. And they show it. They have no problem with it. There's points where, people are just masturbating out of nowhere. They're having a, major conversation of a matter of trade. And they just start masturbating. A husband and wife, they're there. And unfortunately, they're slaves. Again, historically accurate. But, the slaves start masturbating them or whatever. So there's literally the phrase no holds barred. There are no holds barred. They just, whatever they want to show at the time, they show, and they don't care. There's no concern over verbiage. There's just no concern. Everything is, they just let it ride. And that is so rare. Okay, we talked about South Park earlier. That's one of the big things about South Park. Remember what South Park was the first show on television, I think, to say bitch or fuck, or is one of those words that was never ever able to be said on television before until South Park did it. And they made it such a big deal. Well, here's the beauty of Spartacus is that it does everything you can imagine and it doesn't care. It just does it. That's what I mean. It's on the next level. It's actually, okay, what would a show look like in a free society? Well, it'd probably look like Spartacus. And it is a show that has a lot to, unfortunately, it is a show that has a lot to do with human freedom. That just runs through the whole show. No doubt about it, in no uncertain terms. They're very, very clear on that. They are wanting human freedom and that every human has the same rights as any other human. So there's some really good messages there, no doubt about it, albeit kind of simplistic, but they are simple messages. That's why they attract everybody. And that's in there, but I wouldn't want to say that, it's like a libertarian show. I wouldn't make that claim at all. But that kind of message is a part of it. But again, unfortunately, they want that human freedom at the price of blood. And, that's something I don't agree with at all. But as far as entertainment, incredibly entertaining. The actors are fantastic. In fact, the lead actor who played Spartacus, Andy Whitfield, he died from cancer at the end of the first season, they made a prequel show because he had cancer and they didn't know if he could come back for the second season. They wanted to give him time to heal up because the show was, at least somewhere, is really popular. I don't know where, because I can rarely, other than the people that have called into Free Talk Live and have kindly said, I am Spartacus or whatever, I can't find anybody else that's seen this show, which blows my mind. But apparently it was very popular. Again, I don't know with who, other than me, but it was a very, very popular show. And so they wanted to do, they knew they needed to do a second season, but they couldn't get Andy Whitfield right away. So they did a prequel series. And during the filming of that prequel series, which is like 6 episodes, Andy Whitfield died, and they got another guy, I think Liam McKnight or something like that. He came in, and he did a fine job. He did as good. Otherwise, most of the actors stayed pretty much the same. But I mean, you really, especially with season one of Spartacus is so good. You get very used to Andy Whitfield's performance, and when it's not there, you definitely notice. But the show ended up going 4 years. And it was great. Again, sadly, it just ended. But it was a great show. I wish it went on for 10 years. And even though it took a lot of, is it 100% historically accurate? No, not at all. And of course, how could it even be? I mean, you could base it off of like loose things that were done loose things that we know from history that were written by, the Romans, which that's the whole story of Spartacus, is that Spartacus is a slave and he's trying to, and he becomes a gladiator and he's trying to free himself from slavery, which he considers to be wrong. And he convinces other slaves that it's wrong. And so there's a slave rebellion that literally happened, over 2,000 years ago. And so, it reminds me of a thing that Ridley Scott ran into when he was making Gladiator, the movie Gladiator, is that people wrote to him and said, it's like, oh, Romans didn't, have these fire pits where they would light all their arrows on fire. And Ridley Scott's just like, well, how do you know? Were you there? And so, again, the whole idea that you have to be like, you have to have absolute fidelity to history is not really possible. And I think is kind of a crazy, precept to put on somebody. But an interesting note, and I bring this up all the time because, again, like I said, I definitely enjoy the show for its rampant sex. And they made a porn. One of those like parody porns that are very popular right now. They made a porn of Spartacus, lots of big actors, Tommy Gunn, all that. And I watched it, and the show has more sex than that movie did. And the movie's the porn. I mean, that's just, what more do you need to know? As far as like, okay, really, how much sex does this have? And so the other 2 points I want to bring up is that everybody talks about Game of Thrones like it's some kind of big deal that it has tons of sex in it. Does not, obviously, like I just stated, does not compare to Spartacus. And the other thing I wonder is that why isn't like the LGBT community really, really into the show? Because again, it treats being gay like that's totally normal. Why wouldn't you be? So anyway, Spartacus, check it out. A million ways to get that show. It's relatively new. Hope you enjoy it. And I will see you next week on Sovereign Tech.
This has been Sovereign Tech. Visit us at sovereigntech.com. That's SOVRYN tech.com. There you can connect with us, see more of what you've heard on today's show, and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is open source. We encourage you to share. Later, nerds.